I made a blazer for the very first time in my life and I am super duper satisfied with the outcome. Yes, it is far from perfect, guys. Making a blazer is not something that is so easy. I tried as much as possible to simplify the steps so as not to complicate my life, and I hope that this video is self-explanatory enough and it helps you. Guys, don't forget to like and subscribe. Let's go. I'm going to start by drafting the back pattern, and in order to that I'm going to trace my dartless bodice pattern that I made in the beginning of the year. So first I am going to add half an inch to the center back because I made this blazer in a little sized. It is not a fitted blazer, so I don't want it to be so fitted. That is why I added half an inch to the center back. So after doing that, I am going to just check to see the neck line, and that is 3.2 inches. Then I am going to make my shoulder slope 5 inches. I am just going to add the remainder of whatever is left to make it 5 inches so that my shoulder slope is now 5 inches. So guys, after that I am going to go down on the bust line by half of an inch. Okay, so our new bust line is that new line that I am marking. I'm going to roll it out and make a straight line, and the old bust line is no longer needed. So now we are working with the new bust line. On that new bust line I am going to mark 1/4 of my bust circumference plus 1 inch. Okay, so 1 inch is the ease. Remember, this is not a fitted blazer, so 1 inch is the ease, and I'm going to connect that with my shoulder slope. So now we have a new armhole, and I'm going to lower my waist by 2 inches. Okay, and I'm going to mark 1/4 of my waist circumference plus 2 inches, 2 inches for ease. And on the M line I am going to extend the M line by 4 inches. So this depends on you guys. The length depends on you, how long or short you want your blazer to be. So mine is below my bum, right? That is where it is. That is where it sits, below my bum. Okay, so now I am just going to mark my waist circumference plus 2 inches. So the waist measurement that we marked on the waistline plus 2 inches. I don't know if you guys understand. So I'm just going to connect all the lines like so. So far guys, I hope you understand all the explanations. I want you guys to know that this is not like the way, this is my way, and you saw the outcome in the beginning of the video. It worked for me and I hope it works for you. So this is our new pattern. Now I'm just connecting the curves to give us our pattern, and this is what we are going to be working with. On the side seam of the M line, I am going to go up by half an inch, and I am going to connect it to the center back. After doing that guys, make sure to trace your back pattern without seam allowance. So after you've done that, trace it out on a new paper. So after that I am going to add my seam allowance of half an inch all around, except for the M, which is going to be 1 inch seam allowance. For the front pattern, you have to copy out the back pattern without seam allowance on a new paper and leave enough space on the top and on the sides for the collar and also for the button area. So first I am going to go ahead and reduce the armhole because the front armhole is supposed to be lower than the back. Guys, excuse the head. I am just one of those people who would enter inside the project that I am working on. I'm sorry for that. So guys, I am going to add 1 inch for the button area on the center front. So the 1 inch is going to start at the M and end at the waist. Okay, so after doing that I am going to add 1 inch to the tip of my neckline. I am going to connect it to the waistline, and that will be the end of the front collar. So I am going to mark 4 inches from the top, which is going to be the length of the back collar at the front, and I am going to rule a perpendicular line at that point. After that I am going to draw another perpendicular line at 1 inch after the first perpendicular line. Now from the meeting point of the front collar to the second perpendicular line, I am going to mark out 3 inches, which is going to be the width of my front collar. Then I am going to connect the new mark to the end of the collar line. Now I am going to connect the new point to where the first perpendicular line meets the front collar line. Then I am going to mark the middle of the new line. Now from the meeting point of the front collar to the first perpendicular line, I am going to mark 4 inches, which is going to be the width of the collar, the back collar at the front that you want. Okay, so now I am going to connect it to the middle of the other line that we marked. I hope you guys understand so far. From the end of my neckline, I am going to mark ½ an inch inwards like so. Now I am going to draw a perpendicular line on that point, and this line is going to meet the first perpendicular line that we drew like so. So I am going to connect it to the other slanted line that we made. I hope you guys understand. Okay, after doing that, guys, I am going to bring my back pattern and I am going to check for the length of the neckline without the seam allowance. So the initial neckline is what we want, and I have 3.2 inches. Okay, so right there from the shoulder slope, I am going to mark 3.2 inches on that perpendicular line that we have. Okay, so after that, I am going to go inwards by ½ an inch like so, and I'm going to connect that new point to the middle of the first perpendicular line. Guys, I hope you guys understand. I'm finding it difficult to explain this, but I hope that the video is explanatory enough. Now that that's done, I am going to mark 3 inches like so, which is going to be the width of the back collar, and I am going to connect like so to the width of the back collar that we want at the front with a curved line. After that is done, make sure to trace your collar on a new paper, then add your seam allowance as shown in the video. I'm going to use the front pattern to draft the front lining. I'm going to first mark the middle at the shoulder, then 3.5 inch at the hem from the center front. I am going to connect both lines, and I'm going to add ½ an inch on each side of the new line that we made. ½ an inch is going to serve as my seam allowance, and I am going to connect the lines. And after that, we would have 2 pieces each of our front lining. Okay, so the inner lining is going to be the normal lining fabric, and the outer lining is going to be the main lining or the main fabric that I am using for the actual blazer. I hope you guys understand. For the sleeves pattern, I'm going to start with 2 lines crossing each other like so, and from the meeting point, I'm going to mark 1/5 of my bust circumference minus 0.7 inches, and I'm going to check for the total length of the back and front armhole, and I am going to mark half of the length on each side of my lines like so. I hope you guys understand. So for the sleeve, I tried to do too much, I guess, and at the end of the day, I just had to simplify it in order not to complicate my life. So after connecting the points like so, I am going to divide the middle into 3 equal parts, at least almost 3 equal parts, and I am going to connect to our triangle like so. I hope you guys understand so far. So guys, after connecting on the first rectangle, I am going to mark 1 inch on one side and on the other side I am going to mark 0.7 inch. So the 1 inch side will be the front and the 0.7 inch side will be the back, and I am just going to draw out a curved line with the lines as my guide. I hope you guys understand. So like I said, I wasn't really getting the sleeves right, and I just had to check the measurements, check the length to see if it measures the same as the front and back combined. And I tried as much as possible to do it over and over again till I got to try it, and I still did not get it right. So yeah, I just had to let it go. So now I'm just going to mark the length of my sleeve, which is 24 inches, and I am going to roll out a line on that mark. On that new line, I am going to mark 5 inch on each side, which is going to make the circumference of my sleeve at the wrist 10 inches. So if you want yours to be bigger or smaller, you mark whichever measurement you want, and I am going to connect to the ends of the sleeve like so. Guys, please ignore the red markers, okay? Now guys, from the other slanted line that we drew from the meeting point to the rectangle, I am going to draw a straight line parallel to the middle one. Now that I am seeing it, I can see that it is not straight. Now that that's done, from the middle of our sleeve to the other side, I am going to look for the middle of that point, and I'm going to look for the middle of that new point to the end of the sleeve on the other side, and I'm going to find out what I have on that line, and I am going to mark it at the end of the sleeve, and I am going to connect with a horizontal line like so. So after connecting, I am going to cut my sleeves into, or my sleeve rather, not sleeves, my sleeve into 3 equal parts. Equal, it is far from equal. What am I saying? So I'm going to bring the smallest part of the sleeve, and I'm going to connect to the other small part of the sleeve with a sellotape. I am going to tape them together, and I am going to make an adjustment. I'm just going to look around to see if I have any adjustment to make, like so, like the one I'm doing right now, and I am going to adjust. After doing that, I am going to add half an inch all around. I decided to overdo because I thought I would make buttons and have an opening for the sleeve. So at the end of, or 5 inch at the end, I added 1 inch instead of half an inch like I did to the hem. I should have added 2 inch. So if you want to do this method, add 2 inch instead of 1 inch, okay? So at the end of the day, all of this didn't work because I had to just sew it straight. So this is what my sleeve is looking right now. And yeah, we are done with the sleeve. So let us go over to the fabric pieces. For my collar, I cut out 2 pieces of the main fabric on fold, and I added interfacing to one of the piece. For the bigger part of the sleeve, I cut out 2 pieces of the main fabric and 2 pieces of the lining fabric. The main fabric is longer than the lining fabric by 1.5 inch, and for the smaller part of the sleeve, I cut it in the same way. 2 pieces for the main fabric, 2 pieces for the lining. For the back, I cut out 2 pieces of fabric on fold, one for the main fabric and one from the lining fabric, like so. And guys, for the front pattern, you have to cut out 2 separate pieces from the main fabric. For the inner lining, 2 separate pieces from the lining fabric, and for the outer lining, 2 separate pieces from the main fabric, like so. And for this lining, I added interfacing on both sides except for 1 inch, like so. I hope you guys understand. Let's make the pockets, guys. So for the pockets, I brought out my fabric, my front fabric, and I'm going to place my pattern on top like so, and I am going to mark my waistline. So after using my chalk to mark out the middle, I am going to use my ruler to connect the lines like so. So after connecting the lines, I am going to go down by 2.5 inch from that line, and that new line is going to be where our pocket is going to sit. Guys, we are making a double welt pocket with flap, but you can decide to make yours without flap if you like. So now on this new line, I am going to mark the middle. So after marking the middle, I am going to mark 2.5 inch on each side of the middle. So our new point will be 5 inches wide, and that will be the width of our pocket. Now I have two rectangles with interfacing, and it measures 6.5 inch by 1 inch. Now I'm going to connect the middle of the rectangle to the middle of that line that we have, and I am going to pin, and I am going to sew within the width of our pocket. So the width of our pocket is 5 inch, so my stitch is going to be 5 inches long. Now that that is done, I am going to place the second piece of rectangle and repeat the same steps. Mind you guys, the rectangles are placed on top and below the line that we wrote, okay? After that is done, I am just going to use my fingers to press the seams like so, and I am going to use a pen to serve as a guide. So we are going to have an opening within the width of the pocket, and at the end of the opening we are supposed to have a V so that our opening is opened properly. I hope you guys understand. So I am just going to open the pocket like so. I am opening on that line, guys. Remember the line that we drew? The chalk is still visible so we can still see it. So I'm just going to open like so, and after opening I am going to take my rectangles and I am going to turn them to the back, okay? So I'm going to bring my rectangles to the back. Now guys, after bringing my rectangles to the back, I am going to use my pen to draw a line at the middle. That line is going to serve as a guide because I am going to be making a pleat that is going to form our welt. Is it called welt? Welt, guys. Help me with the proper pronunciation for this word. I am having a difficult time pronouncing it right. English is hard. Believe me, English is hard. So I'm just going to make a pleat with the rectangles, and I'm going to do them in such a way that both rectangles meet themselves in the middle. I didn't get this right at the first try, so feel free to try again until you get what you want, okay? So when the pleats touches each other at the middle, it forms the welt look. Welt look. Oh god, English. Now that I have this, I am just going to go ahead and sew the ends like so in order to keep everything in place. So this is what we are looking like right now. This is the ends all sewn and ready to go. This is the back, and this is what the front is looking like. It's closer to what we want. Remember guys, we are doing this our way. All right, I'm going to keep this aside and work on the flap. The width of the flap should be the width of the pocket by 3 inches, okay? So you cut it out on an interfacing and you gum it to the fabric, and you cut your fabric a little bit bigger than the interfacing on 3 sides. So I'm going to bring another fabric. I'm going to sew on 3 sides and leave an opening at the top. After sewing, I am going to trim my seam allowance, notch my corners, and turn my flap to the right side. Guys, I forgot to mention that you should try as much as possible to iron as you go. So please guys, ironing is very important for this project. So now I'm just going to place my flap inside of my pocket, inside of the opening we made, and the length depends on you. I think I used about 2.5 inches or so for the length, so the remaining half an inch was the seam that I used to sew. So I'm just going to turn to the wrong side and I'm going to sew on the previous seam that we have. So my flap is sewn to my pocket, and now let us finish the rest of our pocket. This is the lining of my pocket, and the length is 12" by 6.5", which is the length of the rectangles that we made. I don't know if you guys remember. So I'm going to turn my fabric, my front, to the right side, and I'm going to place my pocket, my lining rather, right sides touching the end of one of the rectangle. Okay, so the rectangle that is closer to the M, I am going to pin and I am going to sew that in place. So after sewing that in place, I am going to connect the other end of the rectangle to the top part of the lining. Okay, so I am going to connect like so, and I am going to sew it together. After sewing, I am going to sew the sides also, and that is it, guys. Our pocket is ready and good to go. Do not forget to repeat to the other part of the front bodice. So our pocket has a neat finishing on both the outside and on the inside. I'm super duper proud of myself because I did this my way and it came out looking nice. I'm proud. Now I'm going to bring the outer lining and place it right sides touching our front bodice, and I'm going to bring my pattern. I am going to mark out that point where the front and back collar meet, and I am going to mark out that point on the first lining piece. Okay, so now I am going to sew from that point all the way down. So now guys, this is it all sewn and ready to go. I am just going to notch my corner so that I have a sharp and pointed corner, and what I am going to do is that I am going to mark out my waistline. Remember guys, that is the end of our front collar. Okay, that is the end of our lapel, right? That's what they call it, lapel. So I am just going to mark that line, and I am going to snip the seam allowance, not all the way to the seam that we are cutting our seam, guys, just a little bit close to the seam. Okay, so what I'm going to do is that I am going to understitch the seams, the down part and the top part, to opposite directions. I'm going to show you guys what I'm talking about in a minute. Now that we are done on the stitching, this is what we're looking like right now. Our stitches are on opposite sides, and I have done the same to the other parts of the front. So we have two fronts. Okay, so this is my front, right side facing me, and I'm going to bring my back panel right sides touching the right sides of the front, and I am going to stitch them on the shoulder slope alone. Note that I am not stitching the lining, I am only stitching on the main fabrics. Now guys, let us work on our collar. So this is my collar. I'm going to place them right sides touching, and I am going to sew from one point. Guys, the mark is already there, so I am going to sew, but the thing is, I think I made that mistake. Don't sew all the way to the ends. Okay, so maybe you leave half an inch, or your seam allowance, I was supposed to leave like half an inch on each ends and not sew all the way to both ends. I had some difficulties at that point, so make sure to notch your curves, and I am going to turn my collar right side out. So after turning my collar to the right side, I am going to do an understitch right there to keep everything in place, and now I am just going to mark the middle of my back bodice like so, and I am also going to notch the middle of my collar to serve as a guide. Now that that is done, I am going to bring my back bodice and I am going to connect to the collar, connect the middle point of the back bodice to the middle point of the collar. That is why we did the notch, in order to serve as a guide. So I'm going to sew from one point to the other, from one end of the collar to the other. Remember I said I was supposed to leave like half an inch in order to serve me, so I'll be able to sew easily. I think that was the difficulty I had here, so I had to like notch some seams in order for me to have much flexibility to work with. So I'm going to sew, and after sewing, this is what we are looking like. I'm going to continue sewing. I am going to connect the back collar to the front collar to our lapel. That is what it is called, right? Lapel. But I'm not going to sew all the way to the end of the lapel, right? I should start calling it that. I'm going to leave half an inch from the beginning like so, half an inch, and I am going to sew down, and I'm going to repeat to the other part. I hope I am making sense so far. So I'm going to bring the inner part of my lining. I remember that half an inch we left, we are going to use to connect the outer part of the lining to the inner part of the lining, and I am going to sew all the way to the end. Make sure to repeat to the other part. So this is what we are looking like right now, all sewn and ready to go. I am going to bring my back lining and I am going to connect on the shoulder slope alone. The slopes are sewn, and now I am going to connect the back lining to the back collar like so. Guys, remember I notched the middle, and it was easier for me because I connected the lining. So I have the middle point of the lining to the middle point of the collar, and I am going to sew from the end of the slope to the other end. Now we are sewn. This is what we are looking like, all neat and ready to go. So now I am going to connect the side seams. Guys, we are connecting them separately. So I'm going to connect the main bodies of the side seams. Am I making sense? Are you guys understanding so far? Are you understanding? So I'm going to connect the side seam of the main panel and also the side seam of the lining panel. Okay, so I'm going to pin them first. I'm going to pin them separately. Then I am going to go ahead and sew from one armhole down to the hem. So now we are sewing 4 side seams separately. Okay, guys, again, do not forget to like and subscribe to my YouTube channel, and do not forget to follow me on Instagram at diywithjuliet. My side seams are sewn. Remember to place them right sides touching. Okay, so this is what we're looking like right now. I went ahead to do some little ironing in order to give me an idea of what I am going to be working on, what I have been working on. So yeah, this is what we are looking like. So now I am going to go ahead and work on the hem, which wasn't so easy at first, but I had to do it my way in order to make it easier for me. Okay, so first off, we are going to start by connecting the lining to the front lining to, how do I even put the words, guys? I don't know the words I'm even looking for. Okay, so we are going to place the linings to the main body right sides touching. Okay, so what I did was that I went ahead to sew from one point to the other, but I didn't sew all the way to the end. Okay, so if you want to sew all the way to the end, this is how you place it. But I wasn't really getting this right, so I am not sure I am the best person to teach you how to do that. Okay, so I just went ahead to sew from one point to another, but not all the way to the end. I left about 1.5 inch on each part of the ends, so I decided to unstitch them, do a blind stitch at the ends instead of using my sewing machine to sew at the ends. I didn't want to take that risk because I wasn't sure of what I was doing, and I didn't want to go ahead to rip any seam later. Okay, so this is what I am talking about. The middle seams are sewn, but not all the way to the end. Can you guys see what I'm talking about? So right there, I'm just going to fold it the way it's supposed to be folded, and I am going to use my needle and thread to do a blind stitch to hold that in place, and it worked really well. Okay, so I prefer that to going to sew rubbish. Okay, so this is the second part. My hem is done, and now we are good to go. So guys, let us work on the sleeves. I'm going to take the big and small part of my sleeve, and I'm going to sew them right sides touching like so. Remember to do the same to your lining, guys. Okay, so now I'm going to place the lining and the main fabric right sides touching like so, and I am going to sew on the hem. So after sewing on the hem, guys, remember guys, iron. Okay, so press your seams open. All right, so after sewing right sides touching, I am going to place them like so, right sides touching. I am going to pin the seams, and I am going to sew from one end of the lining down to the main fabric. After sewing, guys, I am going to just shake up my sleeve and make sure everything is in place. After doing that, I am going to sew my lining to the main panel in order to keep it in place. You can decide to do a little gathers at the armhole of your sleeve in order for it to match up with the armhole on your main panel. Okay. For the armhole on the blazer, I have already sewn the lining panel to the main panel in order to keep everything in place like I did with our sleeve. So now guys, let us connect my sleeve to my blazer. Okay, so I've already sewn one sleeve off camera. Let us do the other part on camera. Okay, so guys, the smaller part is going to be at the front. Remember how we drafted the pattern, right? I already notched the middle point on my sleeve and my blazer armhole, so I'm just going to connect all my points and pin them. Okay, so after I'm done pinning, I am going to bring out a rectangle that I made. It is 1.5 inch wide and it is 19 inch long. Okay, that will serve as the closing in order to make our armhole neat, because I do not have a serger. If you have a serger, feel free to use it, but in order for my armhole to be neat, I decided to use this method. Okay, so I am going to sew the bias fabric to the armhole like so. I am going to trim off some excess seam, and I am going to close it up in order to make my armhole neat. Okay, so I am just going to fold twice and close. All right, so at this point I used my clips to hold them in place, but you can decide to use your pins to hold them in place. Take them to the sewing machine and sew, and that is it, guys. At this point I have not really ironed the blazer properly, so that is why it is looking the way it is looking like. But I can't wait to iron it properly, give it a good press, and make it look super duper nice. If you enjoyed this DIY tutorial, please do not forget to subscribe to the community, like the video, and share your thoughts, guys. Have you made a blazer before? How was it, guys? This particular one took me 1 month to make or more, although I had to make something else. I had to like abandon it and make something else. That was why it took so much. But yeah, let me know what you think.